All right, blue-white breakdown time. It's UMass week, homecoming for former Penn Staters like the one and only Johnny McGonigal, who joins me on Bob Flounders here on the blue-white breakdown. Johnny, I have to say, I don't know if the listeners and the viewers remember last time we were on, you were bound for Dallas, the Dallas area, to take in the Red River Classic, Texas, Oklahoma. I watched a lot of it. Did not disappoint. Before we get to Penn State, number one, great call on this year's game going this year. And I got to know, you were going to attack the fried food. Like what did you come away with most impressed with at the fair?
Yeah, Bob, it was an incredible time, and it was one of those. It was me, my brother, my cousin, and this was back in the spring, I guess it was, or it was whenever the schedule was really finalized for Penn State and the bye week was confirmed. We looked at the college football slate, and it's a game that we've always wanted to go to.
Yeah,
and we said, let's just do it, and it was a great decision. I mean, the entire weekend down there was great. Got to the Fort Worth Stockyards, checked that out. Had never seen that before. That was really cool. The State Fair was awesome. You mentioned the fried food, Bob. They had a fried fireball shot. You would have been living.
Oh man,
you would have been living large.
That's like literally drinking fire. Oh my god.
Yeah, it was great. If the fried Oreos were really good, you had to have a corn dog. That's like a delicacy at the fair. And had some Lone Stars as well, of course. Yep. Great Texan lager. But no, it was a great time. And we were sitting in the OU section. We got end zone tickets, and we didn't know which end we were going to be in, Texas or Oklahoma, because it's split right down the middle of the stadium. Mm-hmm. And, being there for that ending, it was an incredible game, incredible experience. Would highly recommend the listeners who are surely diehard college football fans, as well as just Penn State fans. It's an experience unlike any other. So highly recommend.
Yeah, and Johnny, let's draw Penn State into this angles for everyone that's watching and listening. You have an AP ballot. You've seen a lot of the Lions. You got an up close look at OU and Texas, two extremely talented teams. Game went down to the wire. In your mind, is Penn State able to hang with both these teams on a neutral field?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Penn State has the talent on both sides of the ball. On my AP ballot this week, I had Georgia 1, Florida State 2, Michigan 3, Oklahoma 4, making that jump after beating Texas, Ohio State 5, and Penn State 6. And really those top 6, along with Washington and Oregon, I think just those are teams that could easily contend for college football playoff spots. And Penn State and those teams all want to contend for a national title. And I think Penn State has the talent. That's kind of unquestioned. We've talked all season, all off season about what they've got on both sides of the ball, Bob. And I think that certainly they have what it takes to get to that first college football playoff, but that's going to come down to, first of all, beating UMass and taking care of business, staying healthy first and foremost in that game, and then Ohio State next week. So I think we'll really know what the Nittany Lions have next week at Ohio State, and then when Michigan visits in November. It was a great game between two great teams over this past weekend, and I've watched a lot of ball, across the country. But Penn State definitely has what it takes to contend with those kind of teams.
Penn State currently just a slight favorite over UMass. The line is 42, I believe. I think the total is 57. James Franklin did go out of his way to say that UMass might be the most explosive team they have faced this year. And to be fair, Johnny, he was only half kidding because they did play Iowa. Fair to say. Probably more close than Iowa. Yeah, and Delaware as well. But this is a game. This is a tune-up game where you're right. Health is important. James didn't offer any updates really about J.B. Nelson. He was asked specifically about any other things he could share. He didn't really want to share them. But then at the end, it really sounded to me, Johnny, like Trey Wallace, is going to be as close to 100%. As we take this, as close to 100% as he's been maybe since the start of the season. And he talked really about, you look at the passing game. It's easy to forget that, the first two games of the season, He was an important part of the passing game, and I do think that Drew Aller has missed him. There's other issues in play when it comes to the passing game, but if he's healthy and he can go, and he can kind of get his feet wet against UMass before the Ohio State game, I think that's something I think the fan base should watch for.
Yeah, and even going back to the Illinois game when he didn't play, it was questionable, travel with the team, warmed up. There it feels like over the last couple weeks, if he really needed him, he might have been able to go. I'm pretty sure he played a few snaps in the Iowa game. I might be mistaken on that, but he did. So look, once he's back and fully healthy, he brings a lot to this offense. We saw last year at Michigan, a game to forget for Penn State, but he made a play to remember, downfield catch, from Sean Clifford. He brings that kind of talent and that kind of ability in the downfield passing game, an area that Penn State has sorely lacked this season, is taking those shots when they are available, if they are available. And when you've got Harrison Wallace, if you've got him one-on-one with a corner, you like your chances. And so I think he brings a lot from that aspect. From a reliability and rapport standpoint with Drew Aller, we saw it in week 1, 8 targets, 7 catches for Harrison Wallace. And so once they get him back, I think it just opens up this passing game a bit more. Is the passing game going to light the world on fire when he's back? We'll see. I still think the identity of this offense right now is a grinded out team that relies on its running game. Take what the defense gives you, and try and create things after the catch, especially with Keandre Lambert-Smith. But Harrison Wallace definitely adds a lot, multiple facets to this offense.
Johnny, let's get to your question for James for a number of reasons. You and I really haven't had a chance to talk about the Big Ten schedule release last Thursday. I think you either were en route to Texas or you had just touched down in Texas. They released the home and away Big Ten schedules for 2024 through 2028. No dates, but just the schedules. And looking at what Penn State's facing the next couple of years, you could make a strong case that maybe, with the way that the Big Ten is going to be constituted, I don't know. I think I understand why James Franklin said there's really not a need to go out and look for a marquee non-conference game. Johnny, Penn State next year is going to host Illinois, Maryland, Ohio State, UCLA, and Washington. And they go to Minnesota, Purdue, USC, and Wisconsin. Now, a couple of those games maybe don't stand out, but you get Ohio State, Washington coming to Beaver Stadium, along with UCLA. I think that's going to pique the fans' interest. You got to go to USC and Wisconsin. Who knows what Purdue's going to look like next year? But there's some really difficult games on that schedule. You asked James maybe about, the future of non-conference games and scheduling and kind of what maybe the approach should be, or what his approach is going to be. And he referenced a couple of schools in the Big Ten and about what they're doing. And so there's some pretty big name schools. I think people figured that out. And I think some Michigan fans were a little bit feisty over that. Why don't you just explain kind of what went into your question and you kind of how you interpreted James's answer?
Yeah, so I kind of went back. I'm sitting there 15 minutes before the presser starts, and I got a question over Zoom, and I'm like, I'm going to ask him about the non-conference slate because you've got UMass upcoming this weekend, a team that they're paying $1.6 million to bring in to play and basically to ensure a win and get younger guys experience, and then that's common practice across college football. But there have been some questions, whether it's from Penn State fans or elsewhere. Why are you scheduling Delaware and UMass and not insert Power 5 team here? And James said after the Delaware game that he felt that there was pretty strong data to suggest that scheduling like Penn State is scheduling in the non-conference helps with your odds to make the college football playoff. The idea is to be undefeated or to have one loss and to put yourself in contention, especially with that 4-team playoff, which is, what's been eluding this program now since they instituted it. So I asked James, hey, like, do you see your approach to non-conference scheduling in the future changing or staying the same based on a 12-team playoff that's going to be introduced? Because when it was introduced, you saw on both sides of the coin, both sides of the ball, if you will, that there were some coaches and ADs that were saying, hey, going to keep the scheduling the same, et cetera. You had some coaches saying, this is a 12-team playoff will open things up to more intriguing non-conference matchups because there isn't as much pressure to go undefeated or take a one loss. And James's response was basically, we're going to keep it the same. He doesn't see that changing because they're still keeping the same mindset that let's not risk a loss in the non-conference. And especially like you mentioned, Bob, the schedule in the Big Ten, it's going to be difficult year in, year out with the additions of USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. And James referenced that. He also referenced, like you mentioned, a couple of unnamed Big Ten teams. He said there's one team in this conference specifically that's buying out a ton of game contracts that are already signed, basically to go in the opposite direction of scheduling tough in the non-conference. And a lot of Michigan fans took that to be in reference to the Wolverines, which a few years ago they backed out of a home and home. I believe it was with UCLA to schedule Hawaii and East Carolina. But also Ohio State did this recently. Ohio State also pulled the plug on a home and home with Washington before Washington was added to the Big Ten. Basically along the same lines, like they paid a $500,000 penalty to back out of that contract, basically with the idea that, let's make this non-conference a little easier on ourselves with a tough Big Ten upcoming. Yeah. So he referenced that. And look, I don't blame him. I don't know how you feel, Bob, but like, I really don't blame Franklin, Pat Kraft, the AD, the school to take this approach because you're facing USC, UCLA, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Oregon, Washington. Like the Big Ten is going to be so difficult over the next few years. And I know that the non-conference is pretty locked in right now for Penn State, through almost 2028, which doesn't feel like a real year at this point, Bob. I don't know about you. They've got Temple and Syracuse, Ball State, Delaware again, Villanova again. So I don't see that changing anytime soon, but I'm curious how you kind of feel about it.
No, I mean, there's no more divisions, right? It's just going to go down to the top two. The top two teams are going to play in the Big Ten title game. I can't wait to see what the tiebreakers are, but I'm sure they're going to have to keep them very vanilla, I would think. I don't know how with this many teams you could do it any other way, but you look at the four teams that came in from the West. I mean, you look at the Pac-12 teams. I'm still trying to figure out about UCLA and maybe what their future is really about. But the other three teams, good coaching staffs, good player development, great NIL programs, and they are all going to be in the top 20 hunt. And a couple in the top 10 hunt, I think just about every season. Penn State, Ohio State. I mean, those are just six. If Wisconsin ever gets its act together, they could be a seventh. I'm a Nebraska fan. I don't have any hope for them. But I mean, if you're in a division where or in a conference where legitimately 6 or 7 teams have the talent to maybe get into the playoff, and these games are going to be decided by one possession games, you're really taking a pretty significant risk playing a team that could upset you in the non-conference. And I just think that I think it's smart. This is a Penn State program that has not been to a playoff yet, and I think that I think Penn State fans will come around to this once they really take a look at what Penn State's going to be up against on a yearly basis. It's going to be some deep water. It's going to be. It really doesn't matter if you have a slight talent edge over most of the teams in the Big Ten. If you run into enough teams, like three really good teams in 4 weeks, you're probably going to lose at least one of those games just because either you're going to go on the road or it's just not going to be in the cards. I think it's the right approach. I understand why teams are doing it. And what is the upside? What would the upside be to adding an 8th team on your schedule that could possibly beat you.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's you hear some or read on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now. That there's fans from other teams in other conferences calling that approach that Franklin and Penn State are taking cowardly or whatever. Those teams in other conferences, unless you're in the SEC, you don't have to face, like you mentioned, potentially a USC, Ohio State, Michigan, 3 games in a 5-game span in the coming seasons. I mean, it's going to be that trying. And then the other end of this too, that I think is getting a little overlooked, is the travel aspect of it. Because, I go back to the home and home that Penn State had with Auburn, and last season, standing underneath the stands at Jordan-Hare Stadium, the last question to James Franklin I got into him was, hey, do you foresee this happening again? Because, Penn State fans really enjoyed their time down at Auburn, Toomer, all that kind of stuff. And he quickly said no. And I just said, why? And he said, well, X, Y, Z. And the biggest thing was there was a lot of travel, concerns, a lot of hurdles that they had to maneuver to get to the Auburn game and to figure all that out. And now you've got, flying out to LA and the logistical, problems potentially with all of that. Scheduling a home and home with a non-regional team. I mean, say what you will, maybe about them scheduling West Virginia again, or, Pitt, getting Pitt back on the schedule. But if you're going to do a Power 5, big travel, kind of deal, I mean, you're just adding to the stress and the pressure that you're putting on these players that are already going to be going through a lot, planning and your AD and your athletic department. There's a lot that goes into all this. And so I don't view it as cowardly. I view it as smart for a team that wants to contend for a national title and wants to obviously get into that playoff. And I think it just makes sense, even though, there are going to be fans both outside Penn State and within the Penn State fan base that wants to see, more Power 5 non-conference games. I just don't think you're going to get them.
Yeah, and if there's any old school, older Penn State fans that really have a problem with this, just look at what Penn State did before they got in the Big Ten, especially in the 70s. Not so much in the early 80s. They played some pretty good teams, but in the 70s, a lot of the 70s, they didn't really the schedule was not very challenging. They were independent, and you looked at that schedule. They played a lot of the service academies. I mean, they would occasionally have to have 1 or 2 games on the schedule. They also played Pitt, but it was not a schedule that really got them a lot of national acclaim. I think now the acclaim is built into the Big Ten schedule. Like, they don't need what else do they have to do? They have to survive this. If you're going to play, I know they don't play Michigan and Ohio State every year, but if you play either Michigan or Ohio State every year, USC or Washington or every, you what I mean? It's like four bowl games built into the regular season with the travel. If you're going out west or they're coming here, and to really to expect to win 3 out of those 4 games. If you don't win 3 out of those 4 games, you might not make the playoff. I just think that the stakes are pretty high. The money's pretty high. There's a lot on the line, and to get tripped up on a non-conference game that you really didn't need to schedule when your schedule is tough enough. I just think that if you really just wait to see this thing start to play out, you're going to realize, I think Penn State and Franklin took this approach.
Yeah, and on the other end of this too, I mentioned UMass getting paid $1.6 million to come to Beaver Stadium this week to play this game. Like, for those programs that are ostensibly getting left behind by, conference realignment and all that, the existence of those games are huge for their programs just to keep playing football, and not only football, but other sports as well. I mean, I remember when I was working at the Post-Gazette and I did a big story on, the disappearance of the bye game, or the guarantee game, whatever you want to call it, during the COVID season. Duquesne was scheduled to play games, and Robert Morris and New Hampshire and all these different kind of schools, Villanova, And they really were, some of those schools were really hurting during COVID by not having those games. And so I think in terms of the college football ecosystem, which if you want to roll your eyes at that with all the realignment, that's fair, go ahead. But I think it's big for those schools, and it's big for Penn State to have a guaranteed win on the schedule and to get your freshmen and your younger players a lot of run. I mean, look at how it's shaping up this week, right? Before one of the two biggest games of the season against Ohio State, you've got an opportunity against UMass. Hey, go out, get your feet wet. Drew Aller, play a half, stay healthy, knock off any rust that you accumulated over the bye week, and then get get Bo Prabula in there, get Jackson Smolik in for a series if you want to. So I think those games can be big developmentally for the freshmen that you're going to be relying on 2-3 years down the road. So I just think there's benefits to this that are getting overlooked. Everyone wants to see like the Ohio State Notre Dame game this year and those kind of games. Like, I get it. LSU Florida State week 1, I get it. But you're going to be getting that a lot in Big Ten play.
Yeah. Johnny, one thing I want to visit with you on this is because it's starting to become clear to me. I got a chance to watch the Ohio State Maryland game, from beginning to end. I'm very much aware of what Michigan brings to the table in terms of line of scrimmage domination, running game, well coached, tough matchup. I know they got to come to Beaver Stadium, but they have been trampling some teams in the Big Ten. I know they're not great teams, but to do what they did is impressive. Ohio State's defense is probably the best thing about Ohio State this year so far. Marvin Harrison was spectacular, and they needed him to be spectacular to beat Maryland. And Maryland's quarterback, Talia, I don't know that he lost him the game, but they had them in trouble. But it was really Ohio State's defense that really might have snatched victory from defeat. They were in trouble. My question to you is, I think if you're Penn State and you're the Penn State fan base, be careful what you wish for if you're demanding to see more explosive plays, because with that comes the more you go hunting for them against some good defenses, there's some bad things that could happen. You got to wait a little bit longer. Maybe Drew gets hit. The secondaries are good. And it's true they only have 12 plays of 20 or more yards, and not all of those are pass plays. But, Johnny, you look at what they've been able to do, and you look at what they're going to have to do to beat Ohio State and Michigan. They are averaging 36 minutes time of possession. They've been very good on third down and especially fourth down, and effectively shortening the game. And the game's already shorter because of the running clock. The defense is forcing 3-and-outs. They're not allowing a lot of third down completions. I think they've only allowed 58 first downs all year. They've been elite in the second half when their depth takes over. I'm not so sure, especially when you talk about those two games, that might be the way to go, because both games are going to be defensive oriented. And if Penn State's got the better defense, I don't know that you want to really throw caution to the wind against either one of those two teams. They might have the formula to beat Ohio State and Michigan right now. And I don't know, I'm not going to say it's hiding in plain sight, but I don't know how big of a component hunting for big plays against these two defenses should be.
Yeah, you don't want to try it just to try it. Like, this isn't Madden. You shouldn't want Drew Aller to go out there and just say screw it and throw it deep just to throw it deep. If it's there, then give it a chance and connect on it, which again we haven't really seen so far. I mean, we saw it, the Keandre play against West Virginia, but I do think you're going to need one or two of those plays if you want to go, especially if you want to go 2-0 against those two teams. Yeah. I think you're going to need to hit on one or two, but at the same time, I agree with what you said with, the way that they're playing, controlling the clock, controlling the ball, being really good on third and fourth down, being really, really good in the red zone. I mean, they've been capitalizing like crazy, scoring touchdowns in the red zone this year. And then one thing that it's one of those that James Franklin mentions a lot, but I don't think it gets enough publicity, or the fact that Drew Aller hasn't turned the ball over. Yeah, and he does not have an interception. He has not been strip sacked yet, and that's on the offensive line providing protection. His poise and composure in and out of the pocket. We saw against West Virginia him make some really good throws on the run. and he's throwing it away when he needs to. He's checking down when he needs to. And when you're on the road at Ohio State, what you really can't afford is a back-breaking turnover. You can't afford that. We saw in the Ohio State game last year that turnovers killed Penn State in that game. And so you can't afford that. You just can't do it. And when you've got Nick Singleton and if Katron Allen is back healthy, and you got a running game that can grind it out, and a defense that, as much as we talk about Penn State's offense needing to generate plays and stuff, we know that Marvin Harrison Jr. is arguably the best player in the country. Emeka Ibuka is one of the best receivers in the country. But Kyle McCord, I don't know. I haven't watched every minute of Ohio State play this year, but I haven't been crazily impressed by him, aside from really the final drive against Notre Dame was really impressive. But you've got a standout defense in Penn State that, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a great game, in order to beat Kalen King and Johnny Dixon and the guys that Penn State has in this secondary. So, and it's one of those where, Ohio State's at home too. So Penn State can kind of go in there and just play aggressive, play disruptive, and try to play with your hair on fire and see what happens. And so I do like what this Penn State team has done so far. I think it needs to be a little bit better in the downfield passing game, but I mean, I think that'll.
Yeah, and I do want to say that they do need, because they can't afford to, they can't let what happened to them in Michigan last year, where the offense just was really never got going and it was too late, and actually Michigan just kept the ball on them. But that can't be the recipe. They're going to have to play complementary football. They're going to have sustained drives. They're going to have to get into the red zone a couple of times and convert some touchdowns. They can't go 30 minutes without scoring. But I guess what I would say is, from what I've seen, I don't care if it's in Columbus or Ann Arbor, but if this defense has a lead going into the fourth quarter, I think if you're Penn State and you're Penn State's fan base, I think you're going to like your chances. They just have to get, Johnny, to that point where they can put the game in the hands of their defense. Everyone talks about the 2005 Penn State team when they played that great game in the whiteout against Ohio State and they won 17-10. They got the lead in the fourth quarter against a really dynamic Ohio State offense, and the Penn State defense really took over the game. That's what they need. They were able to do that in 2016 with the help of their special teams. Once they got a lead in the fourth quarter, they were able to close it out. I know they couldn't do it in 2017, but that defense is not even remotely in the conversation with the defense they have now. I think that's where they got to get, and maybe it'll take a chunk play or two to do it, Johnny. But what they're doing right now isn't really. I think it is helping the defense in a lot of different ways, and I do think they don't have far to go to get to the formula to beat either one of these teams.
Yeah, I agree. And just to kind of put a bow on that, we talked about how Penn State has held the ball, time of possession, been able to control the clock and control the games that they've played so far. That does help the defense a lot in keeping them on the sideline, keeping them fresh. Penn State wants to have a long season, and if you're racking up defensive snaps against Iowa and Northwestern and Illinois, those build up, those add up. And so I think the fewer the snaps, the better defensively. That's been the case so far. And then Manny Diaz right now too just has this defense has a lot of belief and is really feeding off of his image and his image for defense and his approach and what he's been preaching to them all spring, all summer, all August training camp. And you see that right now. You do. And I think you're going to see that next weekend at Ohio State. You're definitely going to see that this weekend against UMass, Bob, despite how explosive the Minutemen may be. Penn State is a 43 point favorite with good reason there.
Yeah. All right, Johnny, we'll let you. I know you gotta get rested up from the Texas thing. You got the Phillies. I know they're on a couple times, and it's a little stressful for you right now as we tape this on Tuesday. You got a lot on your plate. We'll let you go. That's it for this edition of the Blue White Breakdown. I'll be back with Dave Jones, I think, a little bit later in the week, and I think Johnny and Dustin Hawkinsmith will also have a podcast. Johnny will also have any recruiting news if there is any. But we gotta get rested up for UMass, man.
Absolutely.